Horrifying. The most powerful man in Brooklyn drops to his knees in front of a starving pregnant woman carrying triplets, tears streaming down the face that once made hundreds tremble in fear, and whispers the words, "No one in this world would ever believe. If you want, I'll destroy my entire empire with my own hands, just so you and our children can be safe." Can you even believe it? A notorious crime boss, the kind feared by both the police and the underworld, is willing to kneel in the rain, sacrifice everything, money, power, freedom, for a girl who once counted every single coin for a bottle of clown, milk who shivered through the bone-chilling Brooklyn, winters in a coat full of holes. This is not a fairy tale. This is tragedy. This is guilt. This is love. This is redemption. Paid for with blood, tears, and the complete collapse of an empire. And the real story begins right now. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave. Right below this video, comments, sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. Alright, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. Sarah Miller stood in the dim kitchen of the tiny one-room apartment above the laundromat on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, staring at the cracked linoleum floor that never quite came clean no matter how hard she scrubbed. It was late October of the year 2025, and the wind howled through the single window she had taped shut with cardboard and duct tape against the chill. The radiator hissed once, then fell silent again, as if it too had given up. Her hands, rough and red from dishwashing at the all-night diner 3 blocks away, trembled as she tried to measure out the last of the instant coffee into a chipped mug. There were only a few granules left. She would have to make it weak. She was 28, though the mirror above the sink told a different story. Sunken cheeks, dark circles, under eyes that once sparkled with stubborn hope, hair pulled back in a frayed ponytail, because she could not afford the conditioner to keep it from breaking. Malnutrition had carved hollows into her collarbones. Sleep deprivation nights spent listening for footsteps in the hallway, wondering if the landlord would finally throw her out, had left her dizzy at times, unsteady on her feet. She had not eaten a full meal in 3 days. The baby formula she had bought last week for the triplets she carried was gone, finished carefully in tiny portions. The doctor at the free clinic had warned her any more weight loss and the babies might not make it. She pressed a hand to her swollen belly 7 months along and whispered, "Just hold on a little longer, little ones. Mama's trying." Poverty was not just a word for Sarah. It was a living thing that pressed against her ribs every morning when she woke on the thin mattress on the floor. She had lost her waitressing job 6 months earlier, when the diner cut shifts, and the rent had been late ever since. Eviction notices piled on the counter like accusations. She had sold her mother's old silver locket last month for grocery money, then cried for hours in the dark, feeling like she had betrayed the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. She had no family left, no one to call, no one to borrow from. Just the babies and the fierce, terrifying determination to keep them safe. That was how she had met Vincent Russo. It started 2 months ago, on a night when the rain fell in sheets and the diner was empty except for her and the cook. Vincent had walked in tall, broad-shouldered, fair-skinned, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He wore a dark wool coat over a tailored suit, the kind of clothes that cost more than Sarah made in a year. He ordered black coffee and sat in the corner booth watching her move between the tables with quiet intensity. When her shift ended, he followed her out into the storm, offered her his coat, and said in a voice low and steady, "You look like you could use a ride home." She should have said no. Every instinct screamed it. But the wind cut through her thin sweater, and the thought of walking the 10 blocks home in soaked sneakers made her knees weak. She nodded, timid, polite. "Thank you, sir. Just to the corner of Flatbush and Church. I can walk from there." He drove a black SUV with tinted windows, leather seats that smelled of new money. He did not speak much, but when he did, his questions were gentle about the neighborhood, about how long she had worked at the diner, about whether she was warm enough. By the time they reached her building, she felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. The next night he came back. And the night after that, he brought food bags from the best Italian places in Bensonhurst, containers of pasta primavera, and fresh bread that she devoured in secret shame tears mixing with the sauce. He never asked for anything in return, not at first. He simply sat with her during her breaks, listening as she spoke in soft, hesitant sentences about the babies, about how she was scared but determined. His gaze never wavered, and in those moments Sarah felt seen, truly seen for the first time in years. Then came the offers. A better apartment in Brooklyn Heights, a brownstone with tall windows and heat that worked. A doctor who made house calls. Money for prenatal vitamins for clothes that fit her growing belly. He said it was no trouble. He said he had more than he could ever use. He said he wanted to help because she deserved better. She refused at first. Pride was all she had left. But the landlord changed the locks one morning while she was at the clinic. She came home to her things in black trash bags on the sidewalk, rain soaking through the cardboard boxes. She stood there, numb, dizzy the world, tilting as panic clawed at her chest. The triplets kicked hard as if sensing her terror. She sank to the curb, hugging her knees, and cried silently. Vincent appeared like he had been waiting. He knelt beside her in the raincoat over her shoulders, voice calm but thick with something she could not name, regret perhaps, or longing. "Let me take care of you, Sarah," he said. "Just for a little while, until the babies are born. No strings. I swear it." She was too broken to argue. She let him lift her into the SUV, let him carry her bags, let him drive her to the brownstone on the quiet tree-lined street, where the windows glowed warm against the October night. Now, 2 months later, she lived in luxury that felt like a dream she did not trust. The kitchen had granite counters, a refrigerator that made ice without her asking, cabinets stocked with food she had never tasted, organic fruits, grass-fed beef, almond milk in glass bottles. The bedroom had a king-sized bed with sheets so soft they hurt her skin at first. There was a nursery being prepared downstairs with 3 cribs painted white, tiny blankets folded neatly. She walked through the rooms in bare feet, feeling like an intruder. Vincent came every evening after his business meetings. He never explained what the business was, but she saw the men in dark cars who waited outside the tense phone calls he took in another room. He was powerful, wealthy, beyond imagination, and yet when he looked at her, something raw flickered in his eyes. Guilt, she thought sometimes. Or fear. He would sit beside her on the couch, hand hovering near her belly, as if afraid to touch, then draw back. Tonight he arrived late, coat damp from the drizzle. He found her in the living room, curled on the sofa, with a blanket staring at the city lights across the East River. Manhattan glittered like a promise she no longer believed in. "You're up," he said softly, voice rough with exhaustion. "I couldn't sleep." Her voice was timid, polite, the way she spoke to anyone older, anyone stronger. "The babies are restless." He crossed the room, knelt in front of her, actually knelt, this man who commanded respect from half the city. "Sarah." His fair skin looked pale in the lamplight shadows under his eyes. "I know you're scared. I see it every time you look at me. You think I'll take it all away one day." She swallowed. "I don't know what to think." He reached out, hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers. His palm was warm, calloused in a way that surprised her. "I've done things," he said quietly. "Things I'm not proud of. But with you, with these children, I feel something I never felt before. It tears at me. Every night I lie awake wondering if I deserve this, if I deserve you." His voice cracked just slightly, and Sarah's heart stuttered. She had seen the street confrontations once when a rival group tried to block their car on Atlantic Avenue. Vincent had stepped out, calm but lethal, words exchanged like knives. No punches thrown, but the tension had been electric, the air thick with threat. He had returned to the car without a word, knuckles white, and driven on. She had felt horror, then shock, confusion, but also a strange, dizzying sense of protection. Now, kneeling before her, he looked vulnerable. "I love you," he said, the words bursting out like they had been held back too long. "From the first night in that diner, I saw you tired, hungry, carrying the weight of the world, and something inside me broke open. I've spent my life taking controlling, but with you I want to give. I want to keep you safe. I want to be better." Sarah stared at him, numbness spreading through her limbs. Love, from this man, the powerful, wealthy man who could have anyone. Her mind reeled fear, curiosity, a surge of something hot and overwhelming. She had been invisible for so long, desperate, poor, powerless. And now this fierce, intense, consuming. "I don't understand," she whispered, voice shaking. "Why me?" "Because you're real," he said. "Because you fight every day just to breathe. Because these babies are miracles, and you're carrying them through hell. And because," his voice dropped raw, "because I've never felt this before. It's eating me alive, Sarah. The guilt, the need to protect you, the fear that you'll see the monster I really am and run." Tears filled her eyes. She was terrified of him, of this life of losing everything again. But beneath the fear burned something new, a spark of hope, a flicker of longing. His hand tightened on hers, and for a moment the room was still quiet, condensed emotion hanging between them. Outside, the city continued its indifferent roar. Inside, 2 broken souls stood on the edge of something vast, terrifying, and impossibly tender. The evening of October 29th, 2025 carried the first true bite of winter into Brooklyn. Sarah Miller sat at the long mahogany dining table in the brownstones' formal dining room, the kind of table that could seat 12, but tonight held only 2. Crystal glasses caught the soft glow of the chandelier overhead. Silver cutlery gleamed beside porcelain plates. She was still afraid to touch for fear of leaving fingerprints. Across from her, Vincent Russo sliced into his veal scallopini with deliberate care, the knife moving as though it had never known violence. She had dressed in the navy maternity dress he had bought her, simple, elegant, the softest fabric she had ever worn against her skin. Yet even now, 7 months pregnant with triplets, she felt exposed as if the dress itself remembered how thin she had been only weeks earlier, how her ribs had shown beneath threadbare shirts, how she had once counted every single calorie, like ammunition in a war she was losing. Vincent looked up, his fair-skinned face softened by the candlelight. "You're quiet tonight," he said, voice low, almost tender. Sarah managed a small smile, the kind that cost her effort. "I'm just full," she answered softly, polite as always when speaking to him, as though he were someone much older, someone she must not displease. "The food is wonderful. Thank you." He studied her for a long moment, blue eyes searching. Inside his chest, something twisted, sharp, relentless. He had promised himself he would never let her see the parts of him that lived in shadows. Yet every time she spoke in that timid, careful voice, every time she thanked him for something as basic as a meal, the guilt gnawed deeper like rust eating through steel. He loved her fiercely, violently, from the first night he saw her shivering behind the diner counter. The love had arrived like a freight train, unstoppable, and now it warred inside him with the man he had always been. The man who commanded respect through fear, who settled disputes with quiet menace, who never apologized. Tonight he had taken her to Carbone's in Little Italy, his favorite, his territory. The restaurant had cleared half the dining room just for them. Waiters moved like ghosts, never raising their voices. Sarah had stared at the menu in quiet shock. The prices were written in whole numbers that made her head spin. She had ordered the simplest thing, spaghetti with tomato sauce, because it felt safest. On the drive back, through the rain-slick streets of Lower Manhattan, tension had begun to coil. 2 black SUVs had appeared in the rearview mirror, following too closely. Vincent's hands tightened on the wheel. Sarah felt it immediately, the shift in the air, the way his shoulders hardened. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Fine," he said, too quickly. But his eyes flicked to the mirror again. They turned onto Atlantic Avenue, and the trailing vehicles accelerated, pulling alongside. One window rolled down. A man Sarah did not recognize leaned out, face hard, shouting something she could not hear over the rain. Vincent's jaw clenched. He slowed the SUV deliberately, forcing the other cars to swerve. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed both hands to her belly, instinctive, protective. "Vincent, stay calm," he murmured. "They're just posturing." But the second vehicle cut in front, brake lights flaring red. Vincent stopped the car in the middle of the avenue. Horns blared behind them. Rain drummed against the roof like gunfire. He opened his door and stepped out. Sarah watched frozen as he walked forward through the downpour, coatless shoulders squared, hands loose at his sides. The men in the front car climbed out. Words were exchanged, short and sharp. She could not hear them, but she saw the way the other men stepped back, the way their postures changed from challenge to deference. Vincent never raised his voice. He never had to. When he returned soaked through, he said nothing. He simply started the engine again and drove on. Back at the brownstone, the silence stretched thin and dangerous. Sarah stood in the foyer, water pooling at her feet, still wearing the coat he had draped over her shoulders during the confrontation. Vincent locked the door behind them, movements precise, controlled. Then he turned. "You shouldn't have had to see that," he said quietly. She looked up at him, tall, powerful, dripping rain onto the marble floor, and felt a dizzying wave of confusion. "Who were they?" "Old rivals," he answered. "Trying to remind me I'm not untouchable." Sarah's throat tightened. "You could have been hurt." Something flickered across his face, pain raw and unguarded. "I'd rather be hurt than let them near you." The words landed like stones in still water. She felt the ripple spread through her chest. Fear, yes, but also something warmer, more dangerous, gratitude so intense it hurt. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever stood between her and the world. Upstairs in the master bedroom, the storm raged against the tall windows. Vincent peeled off his wet shirt, revealing the lean, muscled torso of a man who still trained like he expected a fight every day. Scars old, faded, marked his skin like memories he refused to speak of. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the carpet. She was suddenly aware of how small she felt in this enormous room, how her body, swollen, tired, fragile, seemed out of place among all this wealth. Vincent crossed to her, knelt again, the way he had that first night on the rainy sidewalk. "Sarah," he said, voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain, "I never wanted this life to touch you." She met his gaze. His eyes were stormy, tormented. But it already has. He flinched as though struck. Inside, the war raged louder. The part of him that had built an empire through control, screaming that he must keep her, must own her safety. The other part, the part that loved her with a burning, consuming ferocity, whispering that he was poisoning the one pure thing he had ever touched. "I love you," he said again, the confession torn from somewhere deep. "More than anything. More than power. More than this city. And it's killing me because I know I don't deserve you. I know every time I walk out that door I risk bringing something ugly back here. But I can't let you go. I can't." Sarah's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. She had been invisible for so long, thin, hungry, shivering through winter nights in a coat with holes at the elbows, counting change for bus fare, praying the landlord would not change the locks again. And now this man, this wealthy, powerful, dangerous man, knelt before her and spoke of love like it was the only truth that mattered. The intensity of it overwhelmed her. Her heart pounded, dizzy, disoriented. She felt herself tilting as though the room were spinning. One hand reached out instinctively, fingers brushing his cheek. Vincent caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me to let you leave, and I will. I'll give you money, a new place, everything you need. But please," his voice cracked. "Don't ask me to stop loving you. It's the only thing keeping me human." Silence fell between them, quiet, condensed, almost holy. Sarah's tears spilled over. "I don't want to leave," she said, voice trembling, soft, timid, but sure. "I'm scared, but I don't want to go." Vincent rose slowly, pulled her gently to her feet, wrapped his arms around her with a tenderness that felt almost reverent. She rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the violent thud of his heart fast conflicted alive. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for one brief moment. Inside, two souls stood on the razor edge between salvation and ruin, both of them, knowing the breaking point was closer than either dared admit. And neither of them moved away. October 31st, 2025, dawned gray and merciless over Brooklyn. The wind had teeth now, slicing through the thin gaps around the brownstone windows, even though every seal had been professionally caulked. Sarah Miller woke before first light, the familiar ache in her lower back sharper than yesterday. She had barely slept 3 hours, perhaps 4, her mind replaying the confrontation on Atlantic Avenue, the way Vincent had stepped out into the rain like a man walking into fire for her. She pressed both palms to her belly, feeling the triplets shift restlessly. "I know, sweethearts," she whispered. "I'm scared too." She moved slowly through the house that still felt borrowed. The marble floors were cool beneath her bare feet. The kitchen smelled faintly of espresso Vincent had brewed the night before. She opened the refrigerator, stocked with organic milk, fresh berries, thick-cut bacon, and closed it again without taking anything. Her stomach twisted with hunger and something worse, shame. Only weeks ago she had been grateful for half-a-day-old bagel scavenged from the diner trash. Now food waited for her in abundance, yet every bite felt like theft. She padded to the living room window and looked down at the quiet street. 2 dark sedans idled across the way, engines' low exhaust curling in the cold. Vincent's men. Always there. Always watching. The sight should have comforted her. Instead, it tightened the knot of confusion in her chest. Protection or prison, she could no longer tell. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 minutes past 7. Sarah froze. Vincent had left before dawn for a meeting he would not discuss. The house was supposed to be empty, except for her and the silent security cameras. She approached the door on unsteady legs, heart hammering. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men, broad-shouldered, wind-reddened faces, work boots caked with yesterday's mud. One wore a faded Carhartt jacket. The other had grease stains on his jeans. They looked nothing like Vincent's polished world. She recognized them instantly. Tommy and Joey Miller. Her brothers. The ones she had not seen in almost 3 years. The ones she had stopped calling after the 3rd unanswered voicemail after pride and exhaustion convinced her they were better off without her burden. She opened the door with shaking hands. Tommy saw her first. His face, older now, lined from too many double shifts at the auto shop, crumpled. "Sarah." Joey pushed forward, eyes wide. "Jesus, kid. Look at you." Sarah stood there, thin, cotton robe wrapped tight around her swollen frame, bare feet cold on the marble threshold. She felt suddenly excruciatingly small. "Tommy. Joey." Her voice came out soft, timid, the same careful tone she used with Vincent. "How did you find me?" Tommy's gaze swept past her into the foyer, the soaring ceilings, the crystal chandelier, the Persian rug that probably cost more than their childhood house. "We've been looking for months. The landlord finally told us you'd moved. Said some guy in a fancy car paid the back rent and took you away." His voice cracked. "We thought you were dead, Sarah." "We thought." Joey stepped closer, voice rough. We drove all night from Bay Ridge when we heard about the accident on the news. They're saying you fell, downstairs, in this place." He gestured at the opulent entryway. "You don't fall downstairs in a house like this, Sarah. Not unless someone pushes." The words struck her like cold water. She swayed, dizzy one hand, reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. Pain flared low in her back. It wasn't. He didn't. But the protest died in her throat. She remembered the raised voices last night after they returned. Vincent's face dark, stormy, something dangerous flickering behind the tenderness. He had not touched her. Not once. Yet the memory of his clenched fists, the way the air had thickened, made her stomach lurch. Tommy reached out gentle as though she might shatter. "Come on, kid. Let's get you out of here." Sarah shook her head, tears welling. "I can't. The babies." The doctor said any stress could Joey cut in softer than she had ever heard him. "We brought the van. We've got blankets, water, snacks. We'll take you to the free clinic on 4th Avenue. They know us there. They'll check you and the little ones." She stared at them, her brothers rough-edged, honest smelling faintly of motor oil and coffee, and felt the old life rush back. Nights when the heat had been cut, and they had huddled together under every blanket in the house. Days when dinner was ketchup packets and saltines. The memory was humiliating in its familiarity, yet it grounded her in a way the gleaming brownstone never could. Before she could answer, tires screeched outside. 3 black SUVs pulled up Vincent's men, but different. These were not the quiet sentinels who waited in shadows. These men moved with purpose, faces hard. One of them, a tall figure in a leather jacket, strode toward the steps. Tommy stepped in front of Sarah. "Back off!" The man stopped at the bottom of the stoop. "Mrs. Russo is not leaving the premises." "She's not Mrs. Russo," Joey snapped. "Her name is Miller, and she's coming with us." The man's gaze slid to Sarah. Mr. Russo gave clear instructions. No visitors. No exceptions. Sarah's knees buckled. She gripped the doorframe harder. The world tilted, numbness creeping up her arms, dizziness pressing against her temples. She felt the old poverty rise like bile. The helplessness, the powerlessness, the way the world had always decided for her. Only now the cage was gilded, and the man who held the key loved her, with a ferocity that both terrified and anchored her. Vincent's SUV appeared at the end of the block, moving fast. He stepped out before it fully stopped, coat open, face pale with something that looked dangerously close to panic. He walked up the steps without looking at his men. His eyes found Sarah first, then the brothers, Tommy, Joey. His voice was calm, controlled, but Sarah heard the tremor beneath it. "I didn't know you were coming." Tommy's fists clenched. "Yeah, well, we didn't know our sister was living in a fortress either." Vincent stopped 3 feet away. The air between them crackled tense electric, the same charged stillness that had filled the avenue the night before. No one moved. No one spoke. The wind whipped through the bare trees, rattling the remaining leaves. Vincent's gaze returned to Sarah. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but the motion made her sway. Vincent was there in an instant, arm around her waist, steadying her with careful strength. "Easy," he murmured only for her. "I've got you." Tommy took a step forward. "Get your hands off her." Vincent did not let go. But he looked at Tommy, really looked, and something raw passed across his face. "I know what you think," he said quietly. "I know what I look like to you. But I swear on everything I am, she is safe here. She is loved here." Joey laughed bitter. "Love, do you call this love? Keeping her locked up, letting the news say she fell when we both know. Enough." Vincent's voice dropped, not loud but final. The men on the sidewalk shifted hands near jackets. The threat hung unspoken. Sarah felt it, the violence beneath the surface, the power Vincent carried like a second skin. Horror bloomed in her chest, cold and sharp, yet his arm around her was gentle, protective. The contradiction tore at her fear and longing, colliding so violently she could barely breathe. Vincent turned to her brothers. "Come inside," he said. "All of you. We talk. No one leaves until Sarah says what she wants." Tommy hesitated. Joey's eyes narrowed. Sarah looked between them, her brothers solid and familiar. Vincent towering in tormented love and guilt warring in every line of his face. She nodded once, voice barely audible. "Please, let's go inside." They moved as one slow, wary, the tension thick enough to choke on. In the foyer, under the glittering chandelier, 4 people stood in uneasy silence. Sarah leaned against Vincent, exhausted, dizzy, overwhelmed. Tommy and Joey watched every move he made. Vincent spoke first, voice low, almost broken. "I never wanted this for her. I wanted to give her everything she never had, but I'm starting to understand. Maybe the only thing she really needs is to be free of me." The words hung there, quiet, condensed, devastating. Sarah's tears fell silently. She reached up, touched his cheek with trembling fingers. Vincent. He covered her hand with his eyes closing for a moment as though the touch burned. Outside, the wind howled on, indifferent to the hearts breaking within the beautiful cage. November 1st, 2025 arrived without ceremony. Only the low, persistent moan of wind through the narrow gaps between brownstones. Inside the Brooklyn Heights house, the temperature was perfect. 72 degrees, regulated by a system Vincent had installed the week Sarah moved in. Yet she still woke, shivering, the ghost of too many freezing nights clinging to her bones. She had spent the early hours curled on the enormous bed, one arm wrapped protectively around her belly, listening to the triplets' restless movements. Sleep had come in shallow fragments. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the men on Atlantic Avenue. Vincent, stepping forward into the rain, the way his shoulders had squared like a shield. Downstairs, the house was unnaturally quiet. Tommy and Joey had stayed the night against Vincent's silent but obvious reluctance. They refused the guest rooms with their silk sheets and down comforters, choosing instead the leather sectional in the living room. Sarah had heard them whispering long after the lights were dimmed, low, urgent voices debating whether to force her out before dawn or wait until she was ready. She had lain awake, torn between the fierce loyalty of blood and the strange burning pull she felt toward the man who had lifted her from the sidewalk when the world had already turned its back. Now morning light slanted through tall windows, catching motes of dust that danced like tiny stars. Sarah descended the curved staircase in bare feet, the marble cold against her soles. She wore one of Vincent's oversized cashmere sweaters over leggings, soft, expensive worlds away from the thin polyester coat she had worn through last winter's blizzards, the one whose zipper had finally given out on a night when the Gevin place temperature dropped to 12 degrees, and she had walked home from the diner with no bus fare left. She found the three men in the kitchen. Vincent stood at the island, sleeves rolled to his elbows, making coffee in a machine that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent. His fair skin looked drawn in the daylight, shadows beneath his eyes deeper than yesterday. Tommy leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Joey sat at the breakfast bar, watching everything. No one spoke when she entered. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware of how fragile she appeared. Thin wrists, hollowed cheeks, the swell of her pregnancy, the only part of her that seemed substantial. She wrapped her arms around herself, voice emerging soft and careful. "Good morning." Vincent turned first. His gaze softened instantly, the hard lines of his face easing. He crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her elbow with gentle fingers. "You should still be resting." "I'm all right," she murmured, though the dizziness from yesterday lingered, a faint hum at the edges of her vision. Tommy's voice cut through the stillness. "We're taking her to the clinic today, Russo." No arguments. Vincent did not flinch. He looked at Tommy evenly. "I have a doctor who makes house calls, the best in the city. She'll be here in 20 minutes. Joey laughed, once short and bitter. "Yeah, and how much does that cost? More than keeping her locked up here." The air thickened. Vincent's hand tightened fractionally on Sarah's arm, not painful, but possessive. Inside him, the war raged louder, the instinct to command, to protect what was his, clashing violently with the knowledge that these rough, honest men loved her, in a way he never could, without agenda, without empire. Sarah felt the tremor in his fingers. She looked up at him, eyes wide with confusion, and something deeper. Fear that he would shatter. Fear that she would lose the only person who had ever looked at her like she mattered. Before anyone could speak again, Vincent's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed, subtle, but Sarah saw it, the flicker of something cold and dangerous. He excused himself quietly, stepping into the hallway. The brothers exchanged glances. Sarah sank onto a stool, suddenly exhausted. "Please don't fight," she whispered. "Not here. Not now." Tommy knelt in front of her, voice low. "Kid, we're not leaving you with a man who has guys outside waiting to block doors. That's not protection. That's a cage." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words would not come. Because part of her knew he was right. In the hallway, Vincent answered the call. The voice on the other end belonged to Marco, a young man in his early 20s. Quiet, diligent, one of the few people Vincent trusted with the security feeds. Marco worked the night shift at the private monitoring company Vincent used for the brownstone. He spoke in a rush, voice trembling. "Mr. Russo." I copied the footage. The 9 minutes they told me to erase. "From the night she got hurt." Vincent's heart stopped. Marco continued, words tumbling. "I didn't delete the original. I have it on a drive. I know I shouldn't have, but I saw her face on the news. They're saying she fell. But the tape shows Vincent's voice came out hoarse. 'Where are you? Still at the office. But they're coming to wipe the system clean this morning. I don't know what to do." Vincent closed his eyes. Inside him, everything fractured. The guilt that had been gnawing for weeks now roared into something monstrous, remorse so violent it felt like a blade twisting in his chest. He had hurt her. Not with fists, he had never struck her, but with the pressure of his world, the weight of his temper. The moment he had raised his voice too loud, stepped too close, let the darkness leak through, and now a boy barely out of his teens held proof. Marco Vincent said very quietly, "Do not give that drive to anyone. Not yet. Meet me tonight. 9 o'clock. The bench in Prospect Park near the lake. Bring nothing but the drive. Come alone." There was a long pause. "I'm scared, Mr. Russo." "So am I," Vincent answered, and the admission cost him more than any threat he had ever faced. He ended the call. When he returned to the kitchen, Sarah was watching him. She saw the change, the pallor, the way his hands shook when he thought no one noticed. She rose, crossed the room, placed her small, cold hand over his. Vincent, he looked down at her thin, fragile, carrying his children, carrying the weight of his sins, and felt something inside him give way. "I have to go out," he said. "Business." Tommy snorted. "Of course." Vincent ignored him. He cupped Sarah's face gently. "Stay here, please. I'll be back before dark." She searched his eyes. "Promise, I promise." He kissed her forehead, slow, reverent, a gesture so tender it silenced the room. Then he left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Vincent walked to the waiting SUV, but before he reached it, another car, a silver sedan, pulled up sharply. 2 men stepped out. Not his, rivals. The same men from the avenue. They blocked his path. Russo, the taller one, said, "Word is you're going soft. Keeping a civilian girl in your house makes you vulnerable." Vincent stopped. His voice was calm, deadly quiet. "Move." The man smiled. Or what, behind Vincent, his driver stepped out, hand near his jacket. The street was empty, but the tension was electric, 2 worlds colliding in broad daylight. Vincent took 1 step forward. "You have 5 seconds to get back in your car." The man laughed. Vincent did not move again. He simply waited. The rival hesitated. Then he spat on the sidewalk and retreated. As the silver car pulled away, Vincent exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Inside, the conflict tore deeper, the man who commanded fear versus the man who knelt before a frightened woman and begged her to stay. He climbed into the SUV. Back in the kitchen, Sarah stood at the window watching him leave. Tommy and Joey flanked her, protective, silent. She touched her lips where his kiss had lingered. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Joey put an arm around her shoulders. "We'll figure it out, kid. Together." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, relentless. Inside, 3 hearts beat in uneasy rhythm, waiting for the moment when everything would either shatter or finally begin to heal. The morning of November 2nd, 2025 broke cold and unforgiving over Brooklyn Heights. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the wind carried the sharp salt of the nearby harbor. Inside the brownstone, the heating system hummed steadily, yet Sarah Miller still felt the chill deep in her marrow. A phantom cold from too many nights spent huddled under a single threadbare blanket in a drafty Flatbush walk-up, the kind of cold that settled into your joints and never quite left. She sat at the kitchen island in silence, wrapped in one of Vincent's heavy wool, throws the triplets restless beneath her ribs. Tommy and Joey had stepped out to buy coffee from the corner bodega, real coffee, not the imported beans. Vincent kept in glass jars, leaving her alone for the first time since their arrival. The house felt too large without them, too quiet, too perfect. She traced the smooth edge of the granite countertop with a trembling finger, remembering how she used to count quarters on a cracked formica table, deciding whether she could afford milk or bread. The front door opened. Vincent entered, coat dusted with early frost, carrying 2 paper bags from the best bakery in Park Slope. His face was drawn, the lines around his mouth deeper than yesterday. He set the bags down carefully as though afraid of breaking something fragile. Sarah looked up. "You're back early." He nodded once. "I couldn't stay away." He moved toward her slowly, knelt beside her stool the way he had so many times now, kneeling before her like a supplicant before a saint. His fair hands strong enough to command men, and silence rooms rested gently on her knees. "I dreamed about you last night," he said quietly. "You were standing on the sidewalk outside the diner, again rain soaking through that thin coat you used to wear, the one with the broken zipper. You were shivering and I couldn't reach you. I kept running, but the distance between us just grew." Sarah's throat tightened. She remembered that coat, how the wind had sliced through the holes, how she had hugged herself against the cold until her arms ached. She remembered the nights she had cried herself to sleep on the floor, because the mattress was too thin to keep the chill from rising through the boards. Vincent's voice dropped lower, raw. "I hate that I let you live like that for even one day. I hate that I didn't find you sooner. the guilt. It's eating me alive, Sarah. Every time I look at you, I see how thin you still are, how tired, and I know I'm the reason you're carrying so much fear now. Tears welled in her eyes. You gave me everything, she whispered. Voice soft, timid, polite, even now. A warm place. Food. Safety for the babies. And I almost took it all away with my anger, he finished. With my world. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang sharp, insistent. Vincent Rowe's face hardening. He crossed to the security panel, checked the camera, then glanced back at Sarah. Stay here. He opened the door. 3 men stood on the stoop, strangers. But Sarah recognized the type immediately. Hard-eyed, well-dressed, carrying the same quiet menace Vincent sometimes wore like a second skin. The leader, a man with silver at the temples, spoke first. Russo, we need to talk. Now. Vincent stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Through the frosted glass, Sarah could see only silhouettes, hear only fragments. She's not part of this. You're making enemies. The girl makes you weak. The words twisted in her chest like knives. She pressed her hands to her belly, heart racing. The triplets kicked hard as though sensing her sudden terror. Pain lanced through her lower back, sharp, unexpected. She gasped, clutching the edge of the island. The door opened again. Vincent returned alone, face pale, eyes stormy. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt once more. They want me to choose, he said, voice low. They think keeping you here makes me vulnerable. They're wrong. You make me want to be better. But they won't stop. Sarah reached for him, fingers trembling. What are we going to do? Before he could answer, another wave of pain gripped her deeper, this time stealing her breath. She doubled forward, a small cry escaping her lips. Vincent caught her. Sarah. It hurts, she whispered. The babies. He lifted her in his arms as though she weighed nothing. Carried her through the house to the master bedroom, laid her gently on the bed. His hands shook as he dialed the doctor. Minutes later, the private physician arrived, gray-haired, calm, carrying a black leather bag that probably cost more than Sarah's entire life savings had ever held. He examined her quickly, face grave. Premature labor, he said. We need to get her to the hospital. Now. Vincent's world narrowed to a single point. Sarah's face pale against the white pillows, her small hand clutching his. He carried her to the waiting SUV himself, past the men still lingering on the sidewalk, past the wind that whipped through the trees, past everything except the terror in his own chest. At the hospital, private wing security at every door, doctors moved swiftly. Sarah was wheeled into delivery monitors, beeping nurses speaking in low, urgent tones. Vincent paced the hallway, fists clenched. Inside him, the conflict reached a deafening roar, the man who had built an empire through control, now powerless to stop the one thing he loved most from slipping away. Remorse crashed over him in waves, gnawing, violent, unrelenting. He had brought her here. He had kept her here. And now the babies he had never dared dream of might not survive because of him. Tommy and Joey arrived minutes later, running through the corridors, faces white. They found Vincent leaning against the wall, head bowed. Joey grabbed his collar. What did you do to her, Vincent? Did not resist. Nothing, he said, voice broken. Everything. Tommy pulled Joey back. Let him be. She needs us now. Hours passed in fragments, quiet, condensed moments of stillness, broken by the sudden rush of nurses. The doctor's calm voice, the monitor's relentless rhythm. Sarah labored in waves of pain and fear, whispering to the babies, begging them to hold on. Between contractions, she reached for Vincent's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. I'm scared, she told him, voice small. I know, he answered, tears he could no longer hide, tracking down his cheeks. I'm right here. At last, the first cry pierced the room, thin, fragile, but alive. A boy, then a girl. Then after a terrifying silence, the second girl, smaller than the others, struggling. The doctor worked quickly. She's premature. We need to get her to NICU. Sarah watched through tears as the tiny bundle was whisked away, tubes and monitors already attached. She reached out, hand trembling, but the nurse was already gone. Vincent stood frozen, staring at the empty incubator space. The smallest girl, his daughter, fighting for breath because of the stress he had allowed into their lives. He sank to his knees beside Sarah's bed, forehead resting on the mattress, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Sarah reached down, fingers threading through his hair. She's going to be okay, she said, voice soft but steady. They all are. Because you're here. Because we're here. Outside the window, the city lights glittered indifferent, endless. Inside the private room, a family waited, broken, terrified, but together for the smallest life to prove that even in the darkest hour something beautiful could still fight to survive. The hospital corridor outside the neonatal intensive care unit was quiet in the way only hospitals can be. Soft footsteps on polished floors, the distant beep of monitors, the occasional murmur of nurses speaking in low, careful voices. It was still November 2nd, 2025, though the hours had blurred into something timeless. Sarah Miller lay in the private recovery room, propped against pillows, her face pale against the crisp white sheets. The triplets had been born only hours ago, and while the two larger ones rested in incubators nearby, the smallest girl, tiny, fragile, no more than 3 pounds, remained in the NICU, fighting for every breath. Sarah stared at the empty space where the third crib should have been, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had not eaten since the delivery. The tray of food the nurse brought remained untouched. Her hands, still swollen from labor, rested protectively over her now flatter stomach. She felt hollow, physically, emotionally, the way she had felt on those endless nights in Flatbush, when the power had been cut, and she had sat in the dark, counting the last few dollars in her pocket, wondering how she would feed herself the next day. Vincent Russo sat beside her bed in a chair that looked too small for his broad frame. He had not changed clothes since the delivery room. His shirt was wrinkled, cuffs rolled back, revealing the faint scars on his forearms. His fair-skinned face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes never left her. Inside him, the storm raged, remorse so sharp it felt like broken glass in his chest. He had brought her to this point. His world, his enemies, his temper had pushed her body to the edge. Every time the smallest baby's monitor alarmed down the hall, the sound pierced him like an accusation. He reached for her hand. "She's strong," he said quietly. "Like her mother." Sarah looked at him, eyes red-rimmed. "They said she might need help breathing for days, maybe weeks." Her voice trembled, soft, timid, the polite tone she always used with him fraying at the edges. "What if she doesn't make it, Vincent? What if I lose her because of everything?" Vincent's throat worked. He squeezed her hand gently. "You won't lose her. I won't let that happen." But the words felt empty even to him. He could command men's silence, rivals move, millions through hidden accounts, but he could not command life itself. Outside the hospital, the city had begun to stir. The grainy security footage, 9 minutes of hallway camera, showing Vincent looming over Sarah in the brownstone foyer. His voice raised her body, backing away in fear, had leaked. Not to the police. Not yet. To the internet. First to a small Brooklyn community forum, then to local news aggregators, then to every social media feed in New York. By midday, the clip was trending hashtags, spreading like wildfire. Brooklyn Brownstone, Russo exposed, who hurts pregnant women. Vincent's phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it. Tommy and Joey returned from the cafeteria carrying paper cups of weak hospital coffee. They stopped in the doorway, faces grim. Tommy held up his phone. "It's everywhere, Sarah. The video. People are saying he hurt you." Sarah's breath caught. She looked at Vincent. "Is it true?" Vincent met her gaze without flinching. "I never laid a hand on you," he said. "But I scared you. I let my anger rise too high. And that moment is on tape now." The room fell silent. Joey stepped forward. "We're taking her home. To our place in Bay Ridge. She's not staying here with you." Vincent rose slowly. "She's not going anywhere until the babies are stable." Tommy's fists clenched. "You don't get to decide that anymore." The tension crackled, two worlds colliding again, this time in a hospital corridor. Before anyone could move, Vincent's phone rang again. He answered this time. Marco's voice came through, panicked. "Mr. Russo, they're outside the monitoring office. They know I copied the file. They're coming for me." Vincent's face hardened. "Where are you now? Heading to the park?" "I'll be at the bench in 20 minutes. Vincent ended the call. He looked at Sarah. "I have to go. But I'll be back. I swear it." Sarah reached for him, fingers trembling. "Don't leave us." He knelt beside the bed, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not leaving you. I'm protecting you. All of you." He kissed her gently, slow, desperate, filled with every unspoken apology, and then he was gone. Outside the hospital, the wind whipped through the parking lot. Vincent climbed into his SUV, but before the driver could pull away, 2 familiar silver sedans blocked the exit. The same men from earlier stepped out, calm, deliberate. The leader approached Vincent's window. "Russo," he said, "the footage is out. Your little secret's done. Hand over the girl and walk away clean. Or we make this public in ways you won't like." Vincent rolled down the window. His voice was ice. "You touch her, you touch my children, and there won't be enough of you left to bury." The man smiled thinly. Bold words for a man who's already losing control. Vincent stared him down. 5 seconds. The rival hesitated, then backed away. The silver cars moved aside. Vincent's driver accelerated. Across the city, the truth continued to spread. News vans gathered outside the hospital. Reporters whispered into cameras. Social media erupted with outrage, strangers posting about the pregnant woman in the video, about the powerful man who had kept her hidden. Hashtags multiplied. Donations poured into a fund someone had started for the Brooklyn mom and her babies. Strangers who had never met Sarah sent messages of support, prayers, promises to help. In the hospital room, Sarah watched the coverage on the muted television. Her face pale, frightened, flashed across the screen in a still from the footage. She turned away, tears falling anew. Tommy sat beside her, holding her hand. "We'll get through this, kid." Joey paced. "He's dangerous, Sarah. You saw the men outside. You saw how he talks to them." Sarah closed her eyes. "He loves me," she whispered. "I know he does. But I'm so scared." The smallest baby's monitor alarmed again down the hall. Sarah sat up, dizzy, weak. "I need to see her." Tommy helped her into a wheelchair. They moved quietly through the corridors, past nurses who offered gentle smiles, past security who now watched them with new wariness. In the NICU, the tiny girl lay in her incubator, wires and tubes everywhere, chest rising and falling with effort. Sarah pressed her hand to the glass, tears streaming. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mama's here." Vincent arrived at Prospect Park just as dusk fell. The bench by the lake was empty at first. Then Marco appeared, hood up, hands shaking, holding a small flash drive. Vincent took it without a word. Marco looked at him, eyes wide. "What are you going to do with it?" Vincent stared across the dark water. "I'm going to make sure no one ever uses it against her again." He slipped the drive into his pocket. Marco hesitated. "They'll come for you. For all of us." Vincent met the young man's gaze. "Then let them come." He walked away into the gathering dark, the weight of the drive heavier than any gun he had ever carried. Back at the hospital, Sarah sat beside the incubator watching her daughter fight. Vincent returned quietly, coat still on, face shadowed. He knelt beside her wheelchair. "I have the original footage," he said softly. "And I'm going to destroy it. No one will ever use it to hurt you again." Sarah looked at him, tired, broken, but still fierce in his love. She reached out, touched his cheek. "Thank you." Vincent closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for forgiveness. Outside, the city lights flickered on, endless, unyielding. Inside the quiet NICU, a small heart continued to beat, fragile but stubborn proof that even in the darkest storm something could still endure. The hospital room had grown dim by early evening on November 3, 2025. The blinds were half drawn against the cold blue light of the city outside, leaving long shadows across the floor. Sarah Miller lay propped against the pillows, exhausted beyond words. The two stronger triplets rested in clear bassinets. Beside her bed, tiny chests, rising and falling in steady rhythm. The smallest girl remained in the NICU down the hall, still fighting, still fragile, her survival measured in milliliters of oxygen and grams gained. Sarah had spent most of the day in the wheelchair beside her incubator, whispering promises through the glass until the nurses gently insisted she return to rest. Vincent Russo had not left the room, except to speak briefly with doctors and security. He sat now in the chair beside her bed, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His fair-skinned hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles stood white. The weight of the flash drive in his pocket felt heavier than ever, proof of the moment he had let fear and anger rise too high, proof that could destroy him, proof he had promised to destroy for her sake. Yet every time he looked at Sarah, thin, pale, still carrying the hollows of malnutrition in her cheeks, the guilt tore deeper, a relentless, violent thing that left him breathless. He had once believed power was control. Now he understood it was the opposite, the willingness to let go, to risk everything for someone else. And still he could not shake the terror that letting go would mean losing her forever. A soft knock sounded at the door. Vincent rose instantly, protective instinct flaring. He opened it a crack, then froze. An elderly woman stood in the hallway, small, silver-haired, dressed in a simple navy coat and sensible shoes. Her face was lined with years and quiet strength, the kind of strength that had survived wars and winters, and a husband who had never learned gentleness. She carried a small paper bag and a rosary looped around her wrist. Vincent's breath caught. "Nonna." Maria Russo, his mother, looked past him into the room. Her eyes found Sarah immediately. Something softened in her expression, then hardened again when she looked back at her son. "Let me in, Vincenzo," she said, voice low but firm. "We need to talk." Vincent stepped aside. Maria entered slowly, eyes sweeping the room, the expensive monitors, the fresh flowers delivered by some anonymous donor, the bassinets holding her grandchildren. She stopped beside Sarah's bed. Sarah looked up, uncertain, timid. "Hello, ma'am." Maria's face crumpled for just a moment. She reached out, placed a gentle, wrinkled hand on Sarah's forehead as though checking for fever, the same gesture she had used when Vincent was a boy with the flu. "You poor child," Maria murmured. "Look at you. So thin, so tired." Sarah's eyes filled. No one had spoken to her with such simple maternal tenderness in years. She felt suddenly small again, the way she had felt at 21, sleeping on a borrowed couch after her mother passed, counting change for laundry, wondering if she would ever be warm again. Maria turned to Vincent. Outside. Now. They stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind them. Vincent faced his mother, tall, powerful, yet somehow diminished in her presence. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. It's not safe. Maria lifted her chin. I raised you better than this, Vincenzo. I came because I saw the video. Everyone has seen it. And I saw her face, your Sarah. Pregnant, terrified, backing away from my own son. Vincent flinched as though struck. I didn't touch her. You didn't have to. Maria's voice cracked only slightly. You scared her. You let your world touch her. And now look, 3 babies fighting for breath because of the stress you brought into her life. The words landed like blows. Vincent leaned against the wall, head bowed. Inside him, the conflict reached a new, unbearable peak remorse, so violent it felt like his heart was being torn in 2 directions at once. The man he had been screamed to defend himself, to explain, to hold on. The man he was becoming, the one who loved Sarah with every fiber of his being, whispered that his mother was right. Maria opened the paper bag. Inside was a small USB drive. I have recordings, she said, from the house phone. Months of calls, threats you made when you thought I wasn't listening. Conversations with men I never wanted to know. Enough to bury you, Vincenzo. Enough to make sure no one ever questions what happened that night. Vincent stared at the drive in her hand. Why? Maria's eyes filled with tears. Because I will not watch another generation suffer the way I did. Your father never hit me either. But his temper, his silence, his control, it broke me piece by piece. I stayed quiet. I stayed loyal. And I raised you to think that was strength. She shook her head. It wasn't. It was cowardice. She pressed the drive into his hand. Use this, she said. Give it to the authorities. Or destroy it. But choose Vincenzo. Choose her. Choose those babies. Or lose them forever. Vincent looked down at the small black rectangle in his palm. It felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Maria stepped closer. I love you, my son. But I love those children more. And I love that girl in there, the one who looks like she's never been loved properly in her life. She deserves better than what we gave her. She reached up, touched his cheek the way she had when he was small. Be the man I raised you to be. Not the man your father made you. Vincent closed his eyes. Tears slipped free, silent, unstoppable. Maria turned and walked back into the room. Sarah looked up as Maria approached the bed. The older woman sat carefully on the edge of the mattress, took Sarah's hand in both of hers. I'm sorry, Maria said simply. For what my son has done. For what his world has done to you. Sarah stared at her, tears falling faster. He's trying, she whispered. He loves me. I know he does. Maria nodded. I believe that. But love isn't enough if it comes with fear. You deserve peace, child. You deserve to breathe without wondering when the next storm will come. Sarah's voice trembled. I don't know how to leave. The babies, this life, it's all I have now. Maria squeezed her hand. You have more than you think. You have those 3 miracles. You have your brothers. And you have a mother-in-law who will stand with you no matter what my son chooses. Outside in the hallway, Vincent stood motionless. The drive burned in his palm. Inside him, the war reached its crescendo. Years of control, power, silence, versus the single burning need to protect the woman he loved and the children she carried. He looked through the window at Sarah, thin, fragile, yet still the strongest person he had ever known. She was crying quietly, head bowed over Maria's hands. Vincent made his choice. He slipped the drive into his pocket, both drives now, and walked back into the room. Maria looked up at him. Vincent crossed to the bed, knelt beside Sarah, took her other hand. I'm done, he said, voice rough with emotion. I'm giving them everything. The footage, the recordings, everything, whatever it takes to make sure you and the babies are safe. Even if it means I lose it all. Sarah stared at him. Shock, confusion, hope, all of it crashing through her at once. Vincent. He lifted her hand to his lips. I love you, he said. More than power, more than fear, more than anything I've ever known. And if letting go is the only way to prove it, then I let go. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She reached for him, pulled him close, buried her face in his shoulder. Maria watched them in silence, rosary beads moving slowly through her fingers. Outside the hospital, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, cars rushing, lights flickering, lives moving forward. Inside the quiet room, 3 generations sat together, one broken, one healing, one just beginning. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace instead of a cage. The first light of November 4, 2025 crept through the hospital blinds in thin, reluctant slivers. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lavender lotion a nurse had rubbed into Sarah Miller's hands the night before. Small mercies that still felt like luxuries after so many years of nothing. Sarah lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny perforations, the way she used to count cracks in the ceiling of her old Flatbush apartment. On nights when the heat failed and the cold seeped through the walls like accusation. Beside her, the two stronger triplets slept in their bassinets, soft breaths, tiny fists curled near their faces. Down the hall, the smallest girl clung to life behind glass, her chest rising in shallow, determined rhythm. Sarah had spent most of the night in the wheelchair beside her incubator, whispering stories she barely believed anymore about summers she had never had, about a future where no one went hungry, about a mother who would never let them feel small. Vincent Russo had not slept. He stood at the window, now coat still on, staring at the city waking below. Manhattan glittered across the river, cold, indifferent, the same skyline that had once represented everything he thought he could control. His fair-skinned reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed, unshaven, a man who had spent decades building walls only to watch them crumble in a single night. In his pocket, the two drives pressed against his hip like stones. Marco's security footage and his mother's recordings. Evidence, confession, salvation, or damnation, depending on what he chose next. He had made the call at 3 a.m, voice low so as not to wake Sarah. The federal agent on the other end had been calm, professional, unsurprised. They had been watching Vincent Russo for years. Now they had leverage. Now they had a cooperating witness. The raid began at dawn. Sarah heard it first, the sudden commotion in the hallway, heavy footsteps, low voices speaking in clipped official tones. She sat up, heart slamming against her ribs. Vincent turned from the window, face pale. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, stay with the babies." Before she could answer, the door opened. Agents in dark windbreakers entered, badges, visible movements efficient. The lead agent, a woman with short gray hair and steady eyes, looked directly at Vincent. "Vincent Russo, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, witness tampering, and related charges under the RICO Act. You have the right to remain silent." Vincent did not resist. He placed his hands behind his back without being asked, eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Sarah stared numb. The room tilted, dizziness washing over her in waves. She gripped the bed rail, knuckles white. This could not be happening. Not now. Not when the babies still needed him. Not when she had finally begun to believe he could change. Tommy and Joey burst through the doorway, moments later summoned by the noise. Tommy's face was thunderous. Joey looked ready to fight the entire room. The lead agent raised a hand. "Everyone stay calm. This is a controlled operation." Vincent looked at Sarah one last time. His voice was soft, almost broken. "I love you. All of you. Whatever happens, remember that." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. Vincent. He was led out in handcuffs past the nurses who stared in shock, past the security guards who had once answered to him, past the life he had built brick by brick. The door closed. Silence fell thick, suffocating. Sarah sank back against the pillows, shaking. Tommy was at her side in an instant, holding her as sobs tore through her. "He did this for us," she whispered. "He gave them everything. To keep us safe." Joey paced, fists clenched. "He's still the reason we're here. The reason the baby's fighting for every breath." Sarah closed her eyes. The conflict inside her was unbearable. Love and fear, gratitude and terror all colliding so violently she could barely breathe. She remembered the nights she had spent alone in the dark, counting change for a single bus ride, wondering if tomorrow would be the day she finally broke. She remembered Vincent's face, the first time he knelt before her in the rain, offering warmth when the world had offered nothing. She remembered his tears in the NICU, his promise to let go. She remembered everything. Across the city, the collapse accelerated. FBI agents moved through Vincent's brownstone with search warrants, drawers opened, safes drilled, computers seized. His legitimate real estate offices were locked down. Board members of his shell companies received calls they could not ignore. Men who had once feared him now scrambled to distance themselves, issuing statements of shock and cooperation. On the streets, the old rivalries flared. In a quiet alley off Court Street, two of Vincent's former lieutenants met with the same silver sedan men who had blocked his path days earlier. Words were exchanged, short, tense, final. No punches thrown. No blood. Only the cold certainty that power had shifted. One of the lieutenants walked away, shaking his head. He turned. He actually turned. The other lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Then we're done waiting." Back at the hospital, Maria Russo arrived just after noon. She entered the room carrying a small bouquet of white roses, simple, unpretentious. She placed them on the bedside table, then sat beside Sarah without a word. Sarah looked at her eyes swollen. They took him. Maria nodded once. I know. Sarah's voice cracked. He did it for us, for the babies, for me. Maria reached for her hand. I know that too. They sat in silence for a long moment, two women who had loved the same man in different ways, both of them broken by his choices. Maria spoke first. When I gave him those recordings, I knew what would happen. I knew he would use them. I knew it would end like this, and I still did it. Because I could not watch him destroy another life the way his father destroyed mine. Sarah's tears fell anew. I love him, she whispered. Even now, even after everything. Maria squeezed her hand. Love doesn't vanish because it hurts. It just changes shape. Outside the news, vans had multiplied. Reporters spoke into cameras. Sources confirm that Vincent Russo has begun cooperating with federal authorities in what may be one of the largest organized crime takedowns in New York in decades. In the hallway, Tommy and Joey stood guard two blue-collar brothers from Bay Ridge, watching the empire of a man they despised begin to fall. Sarah looked at the bassinets at the tiny faces sleeping peacefully. She thought of the nights she had spent cold and hungry, counting every breath to make sure she had enough air to survive another day. She thought of Vincent's arms around her, his voice promising safety, his tears promising change. She thought of the smallest girl still fighting down the hall. And in that moment, amid the chaos and collapse, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Something small but certain. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to hope. Vincent sat in a holding cell downtown. Concrete walls, fluorescent light, the distant clang of metal doors. For the first time in years, no one waited outside. No one answered when he spoke. He stared at the floor, the drives now in federal hands. The remorse was quieter now, not gone but transformed. It no longer tore. It burned steadily like a flame that would never quite extinguish. He had lost everything, and in losing it he had finally found the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Somewhere across the river in a private hospital room filled with soft light and fragile new life, the woman he loved and the children he had almost destroyed slept under the same roof, safe for the first time because he had chosen to let go. The city continued its indifferent march, but in the silence between heartbeats something new was being born. The days after Vincent's arrest blurred into a gray haze inside the private wing of the hospital. It was still early November of the year, 2025, though time had lost its ordinary shape. Sarah Miller spent most of her waking hours in the NICU chair beside the smallest triplets incubator, watching the rise and fall of that fragile chest through the glass. The baby whom the nurses had begun calling Hope in quiet, tender voices had gained 2 ounces since birth. 2 ounces. Sarah counted every gram like treasure recovered from the deep remembering nights when she had weighed herself on the broken scale in her old apartment bathroom and wept because the needle refused to move upward even 1 pound. She was still thin, too thin. The malnutrition of years etched into her frame despite the trays of nourishing food the hospital staff brought 3 times a day. Her arms trembled when she lifted the cup of broth. Her legs felt unsteady when she tried to stand for more than a few minutes. Sleep came in stolen fragments between feedings and alarms, and each time she woke, the first thought was always the same. Vincent. He had not called. No letters arrived. Only silence from the downtown detention center, where he waited for arraignment. The news continued to report. Daily cooperating witness, historic plea deal in progress, multiple indictments against former associates. The empire he had built was being dismantled piece by piece, and with every headline, Sarah felt a fresh wave of confusion crash over her love and grief, gratitude and terror all tangled so tightly she could barely breathe. Maria Russo visited every afternoon, bringing small gifts, a crocheted blanket for Hope, tiny knit caps for the other 2 homemade biscotti wrapped in wax paper. She sat beside Sarah without demanding conversation, simply offering the quiet presence of someone who understood what it meant to love a man who carried darkness. On the 5th day after the raid, a lawyer arrived. He was middle-aged, kind-eyed, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He introduced himself as Daniel Harper, Federal Public Defender, assigned to high-profile cooperators. He sat across from Sarah in the small consultation room the hospital had provided. Mrs. Miller, he began gently. Vincent has asked me to deliver a message. He would never ask you to come to him, especially not now, but he wanted you to know certain things. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. What things? Daniel opened the portfolio. First, he has formally requested that all charges related to domestic intimidation be dropped. He has provided sworn statements that the incident in the brownstone was verbal, only no physical contact, and that he takes full responsibility for creating an environment of fear. He is not contesting any of it. He wants the record clear you were never harmed by his hand. Sarah's breath caught. Why? Because he says the truth matters more than his freedom, and because he knows how much the truth will mean to you and your children someday. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She looked down at her hands, still rough from years of scrubbing dishes, still marked by the faint scars of chilblains from winters spent without gloves. Daniel continued quietly. Second, he has begun cooperating fully. He has turned over financial records, communications, names, everything. The government has agreed to a reduced sentence in exchange. House arrest most likely after the initial detention period. He will never return to the life he led. He knows that. He accepts it. Sarah's voice came out small, trembling. He's doing this for me. For the man he wants to be when he looks at himself in the mirror again. The lawyer slid a single folded sheet of paper across the table. He wrote this. For you. Only for you. Sarah's fingers shook as she opened it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the same strong hand that had once signed contracts worth millions. Sarah, I sit here in a concrete room, and the only thing I can think about is you. Not the empire I lost. Not the men who once feared me. Just you, thin and tired in that diner the first night, carrying 3 lives inside you when the world had already taken so much. I hurt you. Not with fists, but with silence. With control. With the fear I let live between us. Every time you thanked me for a meal. Every time you spoke in that soft, polite voice, like you were afraid I might take it away. I saw what I had done. I saw the girl who counted change for bus fare, who shivered through winters in a coat with broken zippers, who never asked for anything because she had learned the world never gave. I am sorry. The word is too small, but it is all I have. I am giving them everything. Every name, every dollar, every secret. Not to save myself, I don't deserve saving. But to make sure no one can ever hurt you or our children again. If I spend the rest of my life in a cell, it will be worth it if you and Hope and your brothers and sisters can breathe without looking over your shoulder. I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in the rain, too proud to take my coat but too cold to refuse it. That love has burned through every wall I ever built. It is the only thing that remains. If you never want to see me again, I will understand. I will spend every remaining day making sure you are safe, even from a distance. But if there is even the smallest part of you that still believes in the man I could become, I will wait. Always. Vincent Sarah folded the letter with trembling fingers. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink in small dark circles. Daniel spoke gently. He asked me to tell you one more thing. He said, tell her I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Sarah looked up, eyes shining. When can I see him? The lawyer's expression softened. He is still in federal detention. Visits are restricted. But once he is moved to house arrest, likely within the next few weeks, he has already arranged for supervised visitation, if you choose to come. Sarah closed her eyes. Inside her, the storm reached its peak, love and pain colliding so violently she felt dizzy, disoriented, as though the ground beneath her had vanished. She remembered the nights she had spent hungry, counting every breath to make sure she had enough strength for another day. She remembered Vincent's arms around her, his voice promising safety, his tears promising change. She remembered everything, and in that remembering she found the courage to speak. I want to see him, she whispered. When he's ready. When I'm ready. Daniel nodded. I'll tell him. He left quietly. Sarah sat alone for a long time, the letter pressed against her chest. Outside, the city moved on, cars rushing, lights flickering, lives continuing. Inside the quiet hospital room, Sarah Miller, once invisible, once powerless, felt something new take root. Not just hope, but the fierce, burning certainty that love, when it is real, can survive even the darkest fall. She looked toward the hallway where Hope still fought. She thought of Vincent in his concrete room alone with his choices. And for the first time since the raid, she allowed herself to believe that redemption was not a fairy tale. It was a choice. And he had made it. Weeks had slipped past since the raid, though to Sarah Miller, it felt like years compressed into single, aching heartbeats. It was now late November of the year 2025, the city wrapped in early winter gray. The hospital had discharged her and the triplets 10 days earlier. Hope finally strong enough to breathe without assistance, the other two thriving in their new bassinets at Maria Russo's modest but warm home in Bensonhurst. Sarah had moved there too, against every instinct that still whispered she did not belong in such kindness. The house smelled of rosemary and slow-simmered sauce of clean laundry, and the faint sweetness of baby powder. It was nothing like the brownstone smaller rooms, worn hardwood floors, walls covered in faded family photographs. Yet every corner felt safe in a way the marble and crystal never had. Maria had insisted. You are family now, she had said simply, and Sarah, too tired, too broken, too grateful, had not argued. She stood at the kitchen window one late afternoon, watching snow dust the narrow street outside. The triplets napped in the living room, watched over by Tommy and Joey, who had taken turns sleeping on the pull-out couch since the discharge. Sarah's body still ached, thin arms trembling when she lifted the baby's ribs still visible beneath skin that had not yet filled out. She had spent too many years hungry, too many nights cold. The body remembered even when the calendar moved on. A car pulled up slowly across the street, black, unmarked tinted windows. Sarah's heart stuttered. She knew that silhouette behind the wheel even through the glass. Vincent. He had been moved to house arrest 3 days earlier. A secure apartment in Brooklyn Heights, monitored, restricted, but no longer behind bars. The lawyer had called Maria with the news. Vincent had not asked to see Sarah. He had only asked Maria to tell her he was alive, that he was trying. Now he stepped out of the car. Rain had begun to fall, cold, steady, turning the snow to slush. Vincent wore no coat, only a dark sweater and jeans, shoulders hunched against the wet. He crossed the street without looking for traffic eyes fixed on the house. When he reached the stoop, he stopped. He did not knock. He simply stood there soaked, staring at the door as though it might open by itself and spare him the courage to ask. Inside, Sarah felt the world tilt, dizziness sweeping through her so violently she gripped the windowsill. Her breath came shallow fast. She remembered everything the first night he had offered his coat, the way his arms had felt, like shelter after years of nothing. The raised voice in the foyer that had sent her backing away, the tears in the NICU when hope struggled, the letter that still lived in her nightstand drawer creased from too many readings. Maria appeared behind her, quiet as always. "He's here," Sarah whispered. Maria nodded. "I called him. Told him it was time." Sarah turned eyes wide. I told him you were ready to decide," Maria said gently. "Whatever that decision is." Sarah looked back at the window. Vincent had not moved. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, ran in rivulets down his face. He looked smaller, somehow stripped of the power that had once surrounded him like armor. Sarah's heart tore, love and fear colliding in a storm so fierce she could barely stand. She remembered counting quarters for a single cup of coffee, shivering through January nights with holes in her sneakers, believing no one would ever choose her. And now this man, this once wealthy, once powerful man, stood in the rain outside a stranger's house, waiting for permission to speak. She moved before she could think. She opened the front door, stepped onto the stoop. Vincent looked up. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain fell between them, cold, relentless. Sarah's voice came out soft, trembling. "You're going to catch cold." Vincent laughed, once a broken, aching sound. "I've been colder than this." He took one step closer, then stopped. "Sarah, I didn't come to ask for anything. I just needed to see you. To know you and the babies are safe." She stared at him, wet, vulnerable, the man who had once commanded fear, now asking for nothing. The sight undid her. She stepped forward into the rain. Vincent's breath caught. She reached him, small, thin, shivering, and placed both hands on his chest. Beneath the soaked sweater, she felt his heart pounding, wild, desperate, alive. "I read your letter," she whispered. "Every day." Vincent closed his eyes. "I meant every word. I know." She rose on her toes, trembling, and pressed her lips to his soft, at first hesitant, then fierce, hungry, as though all the fear and love and confusion of months had finally found release. Vincent froze for one heartbeat, then his arms came around her, careful, reverent, pulling her close against the cold. The kiss deepened, desperate, consuming rain, mingling with tears neither could tell apart. It was not gentle. It was explosive, years of silence, of control, of pain breaking open in a single burning moment. Sarah's hands fisted in his sweater. Vincent's fingers threaded through her wet hair, cradling her face as though she were the only thing keeping him upright. When they finally parted, both were breathing, hard foreheads pressed together. "I don't know how to do this," Sarah whispered. "I don't know how to love someone who had so much power over me." Vincent's voice cracked. "Then let me learn how to love you without any." Rain continued to fall, washing the city clean around them. Sarah pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, blue, stormy, stripped of every mask he had ever worn. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he answered. She searched his face, saw the remorse still burning there, quieter, now tempered by something stronger. "But I'm not running," she said. Vincent exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, a promise instead of a plea. When he drew back, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have nothing left," he said. "No empire. No power. Just this, whatever this is." Sarah touched his cheek. "That's enough." Behind them, the front door opened. Maria stood in the doorway, rosary in hand, a small, knowing smile on her face. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you. Before you freeze." They stepped over the threshold together, wet, shivering, but no longer apart. In the living room, the triplets slept on. Tommy and Joey watched from the hallway, wary, protective, but silent. Sarah looked up at Vincent, tall, broken hers. And in that quiet, condensed moment, amid the soft glow of a single lamp and the sound of rain against the windows, two hearts that had once been caged began slowly, fiercely to beat as one. Winter deepened into December of the year 2025. But inside Maria Russo's modest Bensonhurst home, warmth had taken root in ways no furnace could provide. The small living room glowed with strings of simple white lights Maria had hung along the windows, lights she had kept boxed since Vincent was a boy, lights that had waited decades for grandchildren to see them. The triplets now, each with names chosen in quiet, tearful moments, slept in a row of 3 second-hand cribs, pushed close together. Michael, the strong boy, Grace, the first girl, and little Hope, who had fought the hardest and won. Sarah Miller stood at the kitchen counter stirring a pot of oatmeal with cinnamon and apples, real apples, not the bruised ones she used to find half price at the end of market day. Her body was slowly filling out again. The hollows in her cheeks had begun to soften. Though the memory of hunger lingered like an old scar, she still woke sometimes in the night, reaching instinctively for the thin blanket she once wrapped around herself against the cold wind that blew through cracked windows in Flatbush. Those nights she would slip out of bed, check each crib, and press her lips to 3 tiny foreheads, whispering thanks to a universe that had finally listened. Vincent Russo had been released to house arrest 2 weeks earlier. The federal judge had granted a strict but humane arrangement. A small monitored apartment 5 blocks from Maria's house, ankle monitor, daily check-ins, no contact with former associates. He spent his days walking the same Brooklyn streets he once ruled, hands in pockets, head down, learning how ordinary people move through the world without power as currency. He came to Maria's every afternoon, always knocking softly, always waiting for permission to enter. Today was different. Sarah had asked him to come early. When the knock came soft and hesitant, she opened the door herself. Vincent stood on the stoop, coatless, despite the cold, holding a small paper bag from the corner bakery. The same bakery where he used to send men to collect protection money, now just a place that made good rye bread. Snow dusted his dark hair. His fair skin looked flushed from the walk. Sarah stepped aside. "Come in." He entered slowly, eyes sweeping the room, the worn couch, the 3 cribs, the stockings. Maria had hung on the mantel even though Christmas was still weeks away. His gaze settled on Sarah, still thin, still fragile, but standing taller than he remembered. She closed the door behind him. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Sarah spoke, voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking." Vincent nodded once, waiting. "I grew up believing love was something you earned by being small enough, quiet enough, useful enough. I thought if I disappeared into the background, maybe someone would notice me long enough to care." She looked down at her hands that had once counted pennies for a single bus ride. "Then you came, and you gave me everything I never dared ask for. A warm place, food, safety for the babies. You made me feel seen. But you also made me afraid, and that fear almost cost us everything." Vincent's throat worked. He took one careful step closer. "I know." Sarah lifted her gaze to his. "But you chose to let it all go. You chose truth over power. You chose us over everything you built. And that choice showed me something I never believed before." He waited, barely breathing. "That love isn't about who has more. It isn't about skin color or money or where you started. It's about who stays when everything falls apart. It's about who kneels in the rain and says, 'I'm sorry,' when the world would let them walk away." Tears slipped down Vincent's face, silent, unashamed. Sarah stepped forward, took his hands in hers. "I forgive you," she whispered. "Not because you deserve it, but because I want to live in a world where forgiveness is possible, where love can grow even in the places that once held only pain." Vincent exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He sank to his knees right there on Maria's faded rug forehead, resting against her stomach. "I don't know how to be this man yet," he said, voice rough. "But I will spend every day learning. For you, for them, for whatever time I have left." Sarah threaded her fingers through his hair. "Then learn with us." Maria appeared in the doorway, eyes shining. She said nothing, just nodded once, then quietly carried the babies to the kitchen so the 2 people in the living room could have their moment. Vincent rose slowly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band, no diamonds, no flash. Just a plain circle of metal that caught the soft light. "I can't give you the life you had in that brownstone," he said. "I can't give you wealth or protection the way I once could. But I can give you this, a promise, that I will build something real with you, something honest, something that lasts." Sarah looked at the ring, then at him. She held out her hand. He slipped it onto her finger, simple, perfect, right. They kissed, then slow, deep, full of everything they had carried: pain, forgiveness, hope, love, that refused to be separated by color, by money, by history. Outside, the snow continued to fall, quiet, gentle, covering the city in something close to peace. In the months that followed, Vincent worked real work at a community center, helping young men find paths away from the life he once led. He came home every evening to a small rented house near Maria's, to 3 growing children, and a wife who still woke sometimes from dreams of cold nights and empty refrigerators. Sarah studied at night online courses, free classes at the library, learning about early childhood education, about healing, about strength that came from inside rather than from power over others. She taught the babies to laugh, to reach, to trust the world would catch them. And every evening, no matter how tired, they sat together on the worn couch. Vincent with Hope on his lap, Sarah with Michael and Grace reading stories, singing lullabies, building the quiet, ordinary life neither of them had ever known. They learned that love, true love, did not need wealth to survive. It needed truth. It needed forgiveness. It needed 2 people willing to choose each other every single day, even when the world said they should not. And in those choices, they found something richer than any fortune Vincent had once controlled: a family forged in fire, held together by grace. Knowledge grows when we face our mistakes honestly. Lesson comes alive when we choose forgiveness over pride. Education begins the moment we decide to be better than our past. Knowledge teaches us that compassion sees no color. Lesson shows that poverty and wealth cannot separate hearts that truly love. Education reminds us that real strength is found in vulnerability. Knowledge opens the door to healing. Lesson builds bridges where walls once stood. Education whispers that peace is possible when love leads. To everyone watching this video, I wish you good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel Alex Truths like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear that love can rise from the hardest places. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Does it remind you of anything in your own life? Share your emotions. I read every word, and I promise to listen to the deepest parts of your heart. Goodbye for now, and I promise to see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.